I ended with his finishing up his first voyage and returning to Europe. And I think I'm going to move a little quicker than the first presentation, but so he basically returns as a conquering hero. He gets his rewards. Is admiral of the ocean seas and governor of all the lands he claims, which is a big deal. It means he gets to run or be governor of all activity in that area and profits from everyone else's profits. And he writes up his accomplishments, and he certainly puts the best face on it, claiming he made it to the outer islands of the Far East, which he believed. He believed that to the end of his days. So they quickly plan a second voyage to claim the riches that they believe exist in the in the Far East. It's a little confusing to talk about this because what his belief was, he was in the Far East, but actually he was in the New World. So his second voyage begins the same year. He leaves from Cadiz in Spain with 17 ships, with quite a retinue of attendants, priests, farmers, soldiers. And here's a bit of science. He brought numerous plants with him that didn't exist in the New World at this point: barley, wheat, leeks, beets, onions, radish, and so on. And as is reasonably well known, he brought horses and cattle and sheep, goats, pigs, and other animals. And on another date of voyage, he brought dogs and cats and bees, which surprised me a bit. And thus he began the Columbian Exchange. Obviously, horses caught on very well, and pigs did as well. I've been in the South, and the pigs are sort of the scourge of the South. They have large culls of the herds, even to this day. So and the Spaniards also brought diseases, which is what I talk about mostly, because it caught my attention. When I was doing this, you probably will understand, the primary disease was smallpox, and which, as most people are aware, ultimately killed millions of people. So on his return from the second voyage, he brought back maize, sugar, tobacco, chocolate, and potatoes, all major crops to this day. And it turns out that the Indians were quite adept at genetic engineering. They had, I'm sure all of them were engineered to some extent, but maize in particular was mentioned, that it started out as this plant with a few grass seeds in the I don't know if you call them flowers or what you would call them, but they genetically engineered them over hundreds of years to produce corn, which I found interesting that they were capable of doing that. I guess I have a Eurocentric view of the world. And they also brought back a disease, a much more virulent strain of syphilis than those that were in Europe at the time. And turns out Columbus gained quite a bit of notoriety for that gift to the old world. I remember, this is an aside, reading what was it, a book by Voltaire where he gets prominent mention for that fact. And in I think 1496, when I think it was France invaded Italy, the there was a huge outbreak of syphilis as a result of the virulent kind. So they did get back at us a bit, but we got back at them a bit. I'm getting backwards. So, but by the time they were returning, the colonists realized that Columbus had falsified a lot of the information, and they were quickly wanted to leave because they weren't finding gold. So the next slide shows the Columbian Exchange, which and I don't know. It just seems a little backwards to me, but so because as I
horses on it.
Pardon me?
Doesn't have horses on it.
No, it doesn't have horses, and it has tomatoes going from the New World to the Old, which is true, but that was sometime later. It has corn, but going the other way is smallpox, which we brought that to them, not the other way around. I hadn't noticed this before, but it's a pretty picture. So move on from that. And we're now not much happened between the second, third, and fourth voyages, except he was imprisoned. He was returned from, I think, at one point in chains for his treatment of the natives. And he was capturing natives or Indians for slavery because he was under considerable financial pressure to reward his investors. But this is a little side story that amused me, and also has a bit of science in it, that on his fourth voyage, he arrives in the New World. He somehow talked Ferdinand and Isabella into another voyage, and when he arrived, he wasn't allowed to go into any of the ports or visit any of the major outposts. So, but a couple of days after he arrived, he realized from his previous experience that a hurricane was going to hit in a few days. And he also knew that a major convoy of 25 ships was about to leave for Spain. And so he sent one of his men or two to warn them that this was about to happen. As it turns out, he also knew that his gold, all his worldly wealth, was going back on this convoy. So he was very interested in it. So the powers that be, and I guess Hispaniola, ignored his advice, and the ships left. About a day out, 24 out of the 25 ships were sunk, and almost immediately, and this is the part that kind of amused me, 500 people died. As they say here, they probably should have listened to Columbus, and only one ship out of the 25 made it to Spain. And true to Columbus's life history, it was the ship with his gold on it. So it just struck me as amazing that 1 out of 25 ships make it, and it's the one he cared most about. I'm sure he cared about the people too. So now I'm going to move on to the pandemic. I'm going to this is obviously science, and I'm not very well qualified to talk about it, but you have probably, this caught my interest, so it's not hard to understand why. You've probably heard something about pandemics. When I did this, it was just started happening when I was writing this, but now it's not exactly all hat, but I'm getting a bit more used to it. So it caught the thing that caught my interest was, why did so many Indians die, like a million, tens of millions? Why didn't they have the success we're having, where maybe one or two people out of 100 die? And and it turns out I had read a book where this was gone into some time ago called 1991. So I decided to reread those sections and add it to this presentation. So one theory is that there's not much genetic diversity in the Indian population, since they all descended from Asians that crossed the Bering Land Bridge around, I think it was about 12,000 years ago. And as an example of the lack of diversity, almost all the Indians have type O blood. And in Europe, it's split half and half, about between O and A. And in addition, the South American Indians are pretty much free of a number of genetic disorders known to Europeans. So now, to go to the depth I don't understand, the problem, the one theory is there are two, at least in 1991, that the problem lies in something called leukocyte antigens, HLAs. And so in 1990s, a scientist of some, I didn't actually write down who he is, but he reviewed the 36 studies of HLA, and he discovered that the Indians have far fewer types of HLA compared to populations from Europe, Asia, and Africa. And same is true of American or our Indians or Native Americans. Europeans have about 35 classes, whereas the Indians have about 17. And Siberians, presumably where these who crossed the land bridge, had a similar fate when introduced to smallpox. And another explanation, it was proposed that another genetic cause, helper T cells, which, like HLAs, have helped the immune system to recognize foreign objects. And to simplify, the helper T cells occur in two main types: one that targets microorganisms and one that targets parasites. And the body cannot sustain large numbers of both. So basically, their immune systems were tuned for what, not tuned for smallpox or other diseases. They were, I guess, tuned for parasites. And so that is another explanation for why so many of them, because I think it was about 90% death rate. And here's another interesting tidbit I picked up in 1919 that surprised me a bit, that basically, how did us being the original American colonists, defeat the Indians? And because I would always read that we had superior weapons and clothing, or maybe and armaments and forts or whatever we had. But it turns out that their arrows were considerably superior to our guns of the time. That they used to laugh at the guys with guns and then fill them full of arrows. They did not worry about our weapons. But we won because it's believed now that an influenza pandemic, probably something like the one in 1918, basically wiped out almost 100% of them. So it's interesting at least to me, that we did the same. We won here for the same reason the Spanish won in Central and South America. So now I could quickly go through the kind of the political, as I view it, somewhat political correctness campaign against Columbus being mounted nowadays. That he certainly did some horrific things. He captured Indians to be sold into slavery. He meted out severe punishment for minor crimes, although in his defense, if a Spanish person committed the same crime, he got or she got the same punishment. So he was not above handing out very severe punishments. And as I understand it, cutting a person's tongue out was you died if they did that. And he also forced them the Indians into forced labor to dig up gold. There was some in Hispaniola, I believe, and I believe that's what was going back in his ship, that ship that survived the hurricane. So the next slide, and I think you do have to consider the what was common in those times, that because he was a man of his time, he wasn't a crusader or an activist. I was surprised to learn that in England, France, and Spain, they routinely held executions of 100 people or so, to which 10 to 12,000 exuberant fans would appear, many of them women and children. This was considered grand entertainment in that era. And slavery was commonplace. He saw it in his sailing off Africa in his youth, and to him it probably didn't seem that unusual. And but there also would seem to be little defense for his forced labor, but financial pressures make people do things that they probably wouldn't want to do otherwise. And he's been charged with genocide, which I have a little trouble. I mean, they did kill a lot of people, and he did bring smallpox, not in a massive amounts later on, or massive amount of deaths, but it wasn't like he was killing people or murdering them. So his place in history, he did complete 4 voyages. He proved that his belief in the trade winds blew consistently eastward, of which he was one of the few or only person who believed that. He discovered the Americas, or rediscovered them, as I have here, and discovered magnetic declination, and was sharp enough to recognize it, which I find very impressive. And he did insist, in the face of mounting evidence near his death, I think in something like 1515, that he had found the Far East, but obviously he hadn't. And then finally, my opinion on, who discovered America. I don't quite understand the controversy. I think it's obvious that the Indians discovered it 12,000 years earlier, and but Columbus can be certainly given credit for opening it up to the European mind. And so finally, the end. So if you remember, my main interest in this was sailing and how boats sail into the wind. And here's the explanation of it. Number of partial differential equations, and I didn't spend the time to try to understand them. But it turns out if anyone wants to play with them, there's a program I just clicked on called FoilSim, and I've been playing with it, and it does show how changing the shape, you can see basic shapes down in the lower left corner. The one that's like a slave is curved plate, and this one, the one you see I've been playing with, that right now it has a lot of drag. You can see that in the bar graph or chart on the right, lower right. But you can play with it and see, if you move this, you can see moving it up. This is pretty much intuitive that you would get more lift. And so I thought, if anybody wants to play with this, it's kind of neat. You can actually get numbers showing the speed of the air movement along the top and lower edge, starting a little way out where it's the same, and how much it speeds up, demonstrating what the equations were telling us, that and that's where the lift comes from, that it basically is Bernoulli's effect. But as I said before, the molecules that were together at the beginning do not come together at the end, because you wouldn't get very much lift that way.
Bob Primak, you were next up for Q&A on the IoT. Did you want to defer, or are you going to say a few words?
Well, if I have my microphone back, I do have my documents available. I'd like to open it to anyone who does have some leftover questions, because I covered a lot of material.
Your microphone is back.
Yeah, so I covered a lot of material, and if anybody has some questions that they'd like to ask. And let me just review some of the topics that I was doing. I went a little bit back over the basics of the physics of 5G. I presume everybody in this group is pretty well versed with what 5G is and what the physics are, and the bands that are being used for 5G, the low, intermediate, and high band. And the most important thing about that mid band, that it can reach farther and that it can penetrate buildings. We didn't get too much into what's going on with 5G cellular and the fixed 5G from Starry that's already showing up in Boston and in, I believe it's Weymouth, other places in Massachusetts. Actually, it may be Medford. But then we also did things about how the beams get where they're supposed to be. And some people have health concerns about the radiation. And we went over how much less radiation there is in 5G versus 4G. We were also going over supply chain and supply chain disruption. And at that point, the regular meeting ended, and we had a lot of overtime when we were talking about effects on supply chain and upon education, remote learning. And we were talking a little bit about MOOCs versus what goes on in the lower grades. Did anybody have any interest in bringing out any points that we were making sort of in the overtime about how the coronavirus is impacting the pace of 5G adoption?
Well, I had a different question, not on coronavirus so much as that's just going to hold things up. But what do you think the future will be in terms of communication hardware, in the sense that in any industry, there's what's called disintermediation. Well, let's just say you manufacture cement and you have a bunch of people who supply it as middlemen, and then you start selling it directly, so you disintermediate your intermediary. The cable, the physical cable, the coaxial cable, and the optical cable are now the intermediaries between me and whoever is communicating to me. At least at my home. What do you think that will look like in this indeterminate thing called 5 years, where nobody knows? What's going to happen to the hardware side of communications?
Okay, what I did find was a lot about the industrial IoT, the Internet of Things. There are two aspects that are really important in this. One of them is automation, which has already cost jobs at Amazon's warehouse, where you've got robots, and the robots repair robots, and the robots even make robots, and the robots set the robots in motion. This has an advantage when you have a virus, because the robots won't get sick with it, whereas your workers have. But there's also the problem, some places you cannot take the middleman out very easily. This is what happened in the meat packing industry. They could not alternatively move the animals to a different location when workers got sick in one location. And that's a logistical problem which needs to be addressed by figuring out how would you have alternate routes by which you could supply those processing plants that are up and running but don't have enough animals coming in. Similarly, when you had a lot of buying and the algorithms didn't keep up with the change in consumer buying habits, and we ended up with shortages, especially in the food industry. But we also, it also showed up that the AI algorithms sometimes do not adapt quickly enough. And if you have a real emergency, then you could have a pretty serious disaster on your hands. So I don't know if I actually answered that about cutting out the middleman, but it has to do with this just-in-time inventory, forward positioning, which Amazon does, where your goods are already in the warehouse, rather than in some centralized location, maybe out in Seattle, where they have to take days to get to us. So it's about improving customer satisfaction, but you also have to have good predictive algorithms. So I don't know if that addressed the question.
I think my question is more toward the communication side, the physical communication side. Right now, you know, I get these telephone calls from Verizon saying, you know, switch to us. I have Comcast. They switch to us. We have optical cable, which travels at the speed of light. Of course, it does. You know, information travels at the speed of light. And so I say, well, how fast does it travel in coaxial cable? And I get this silence at the end of the line, because these are just salespeople. They don't know the answer to that. The answer is 1/3 the speed of light. Electricity travels really fast in a copper wire, a shielded copper wire. And if you have 5G that can really provide me with a lot of data, why do I need a wire at all?
You don't. That is what Starry is about. That is what 5G fixed wireless is.
Now I looked at Starry. Yeah, I looked at Starry.
Yeah.
And then you just put in your city and they say coming soon, Lexington.
Well, in Boston, there are places where it is. The thing is, Starry connects, as I indicated in my talk, from one of their antennas to a building. So your building owner needs to sign a contract, or your city needs to sign a contract. And that's what's holding it up. It's kind of a political administrative holdup. The technology exists, and pretty soon there are going to be these satellites that are being put up by Elon Musk's corporation for, let me see if I can find what his are, but anyway, Starlink. Starlink is also, SpaceX Starlink, is also supposed to help solve this problem. Okay, so what are the speeds? Theoretically, you can get 10 times the speed out of fixed 5G because the wavelength is so much shorter. But if you're using the mid-band or the low band, that comes down to comparable to 4G or maybe as much as 1 to 2 times faster, which means for cell phone service, if you need a wide area of coverage, it's pretty good. If it's going to be to the home, you could get probably 10 times the current throughput even through Verizon Wireless. And they don't have to lay out fresh wire every place they have to open up. Theoretically, this also opens up to additional competition, but that's up to the municipality.
Does the municipality have a secondary gain in staying with one provider?
Staying with one provider only provides stability in the commerce side of it. It doesn't really improve performance, I don't think, and other folks don't think so. So these monopolies and these duopolies are probably obsolete. The city of Waltham has been debating that in some of their committees as we're moving toward build out of the 5G infrastructure.
Well, does the town get a piece of the action?
They sure as heck do.
Okay, that's their secondary gain.
And the more providers they can get, the more action they can, the more pieces of the action they can get. But
So it sounds like we're going to have a future in which there are antennas everywhere.
where there were what?
The antenna communication antennas everywhere.
Yeah, these communication antennas. I showed that they're going to be much smaller. They're going to be like a lamppost in your neighborhood, and they'll sit on top of the lamppost and stick up a little bit, and it'll look like there's one of these old-fashioned mail collection mailboxes down below. That's called edge processing. You do a little processing down there, and it makes for lower latency, and it makes for better throughput. And the thing is, the throughput is expandable when you go wireless. You can increase rapidly.
But if you have a number of carriers, you're going to have correspondingly larger number on your lamppost of antennas. And then the other question would then be, are they going to interfere with one another? That is, what I'm talking about.
No, your first question, that's not true. The actual number of antennas does not increase. These antennas can be shared, and they are meant to be shared. So the build out, and I've only got a few more minutes. The build out is meant to provide just a certain number of antennas and get the coverage. The number of providers doesn't depend on the number of antennas. I showed how things can be massively multi-user, mu-MIMO. And that is also something that can be provided using either big arrays or neighborhood arrays. And it just depends on how you form the beam and how many beams you want to form. And this is not unlimited, but it's a very large number.
Well, I had a little experience secondhand with beam forming and things like that. Not quite that simple.
Bob,
Yeah.
When the carriers come in, will they be having a number of bands, or will they be just using one of the bands that's been allocated?
For most urban areas, it will be in the millimeter band. However, there are quite a number of frequencies, a very large number of frequencies available. I also showed how, because of the types of technologies that are used, there is a possibility of having many more sub-channels than there used to be. And the result is you can have a lot more carriers, you can have a lot more people connected.
Hey, Bob, just as a final question, if you don't mind. Do you think this will end up being more of a third world innovation as opposed to a first world, much the way cell phones were? The changing the infrastructure in the first world is expensive. Putting new infrastructure into the third world is relatively inexpensive. And therefore, that's why cell phones promulgated the way they did when the technology got to that the knee of the curve where it was less expensive to promulgate.
Peter, this is the opposite. You actually need technological leverage, and you need the companies that are able to put it in. So we're having companies like Ericsson, which can easily build out in Europe, but it's a lot more difficult for them to get to other areas that don't have any of the infrastructure or the internet backbone. That's going to be the realm of these satellite strategies with the multi-satellites with Starlink.
Good, thanks.
So we've basically got both. We've got wide area, third world coverage, which is supposed to happen, and Bill Gates is interested in helping finance that in Africa. And then we have, and China is very interested in financing it throughout Central Asia because of their interests. Whereas we have in the more advanced countries, we have native infrastructure, and we have people who can afford the phones and the plans at $80 a month.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Bill Quinn, and I'm going to be talking today about the onboard diagnostic system in your car. So let's get started with that then. The onboard diagnostic system is now in version 2 in cars, most cars today. during the 70s and 80s, manufacturers started using electronic means to control engine functions and diagnose engine problems. And this was primarily to meet EPA emission standards at the time. So OBD2 is a new standard introduced in the mid-90s. It kind of standardized all these other protocols that were available under the original OBD system. So it provides, an OBD2 provides almost complete engine control, and it also monitors, when implemented correctly, parts of the chassis, body, and accessory devices, as well as the diagnostic control network of the car, which is what comes into play when you see that check engine light in your dashboard and you pull your hair out and bring it to the dealer or mechanic, and they hook it up and give you the bad news about what needs to be replaced and how much that's going to cost. So the Onboard Diagnostics 2 system consists of a port and really a computer system. So the port is what your mechanic or the dealer connects their computer up to, and to read the information that your car is giving it about the various systems. So yeah, it's an onboard computer-based system. So it monitors emissions, mileage, speed, and other data about your car. And the other data about your car kind of depends on your manufacturer. It allows a mechanic or anyone else, that could be you, it could be me, I do this. I was an English literature major in college, so anyone can do this. It allows a mechanic or anyone else to read the diagnostic trouble codes that are displayed when you use a scan tool that connects up to this port over here by that yellow arrow. We'll get into that shortly. It allows you to determine what the malfunction indicator light, that's the famous check engine light, on your dash is referring to when it detects a problem. So that check engine light gets displayed as a result of various problems that that might be happening with your engine. Okay, so where did this the idea for this port come from? Like many things, it started with the state of California because they wanted to start requiring emission control systems on cars around 1966 to combat the smog problems that were becoming famous to all of us at that time. And also the EPA got into the act in the 1970s with the Clean Air Act. Manufacturers turned to electronically controlled fuel feed and ignition systems to try and meet the emission requirements. At first, there were a few standards, and each manufacturer had their own systems and signals. As you can imagine, everyone implemented their own version because they thought that was the best way. In 1988, the Society of Automotive Engineers set a standard connector plug and a set of diagnostic signals. So OBD2 is an expanded set and standards of those practices developed by the SAE, and it was adopted by the EPA and the California Air Resource Board for implementation by January 1st, 1996. That's not that long ago, it seems to me, although it is a few decades ago, but it seems relatively recently.
Bill, could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Am I? So you said this is the system that it monitors the engine and it monitors some chassis points. Is this also the system that would be monitoring the wheels and for slippage, and then try to make corrective action to prevent sliding or spinning out or tipping over?
So it could monitor those systems. Yeah, it depends on your car and your manufacturer. It could do that. Yep. I mean, it would monitor, say, the ABS system.
That's what I meant, the ABS.
Yeah, the ABS system. It will monitor that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is that good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So why do we need it? So the EPA was charged with reducing mobile emissions from cars and trucks, and given the power to require manufacturers to build cars which meet these new stiffer emission standards. The OBD2 system provides a universal inspection and diagnosis method to be sure the car is performing to OEM standards. So, does my car have OBD2? If it's built since January 1st, 1996, the answer to that is yes. And over on the right is what the port looks like in your car. It has those 16 pins, and the port can be white like you see here, or my car it's pink, or it could be black, or it could be red. The color of the port really is not significant at all. The port is technically called the data link connector, and it's 16 pins, and you can see that in that picture here to the right. Manufacturers started incorporating OBD2 in some various models as early as 1994, so 2 years before they were required. So right now, the communication that happens through this port is controlled by one ISO protocol, 15765 CAN, Control Area Network, is used on all vehicles manufactured after 2008. So this is kind of the fun part. How do we measure or view the OBD2 output? So a cable is going to be plugged into that OBD2 port, and it's going to and that cable is going to be connected to the scan tool. And this is a picture of the scan tool that I use for my car. This part down here gets connected to the port, and then by using the user interface, you can scroll and see information displayed from your engine there. Scan tools on the market range from simple handheld meters like this one that display trouble codes to computer-based systems to Bluetooth connector that gets connected to the port and gets linked up to your smartphone. Smartphone apps use a Bluetooth connection between the smartphone and the dongle that is plugged into the OBD2 connector to display the data in the app on your phone. The next slide is going to be, we're going to talk about the check engine light that you see illustrated here over on the right. So the check engine light is a malfunction indicator light, and there are 3 different types of signals for this situation. Occasional flashes show momentary malfunctions. If that light stays on, the problem is a more serious nature. And a constantly flashing light is a sign of major problem that might cause serious damage if the engine is not stopped immediately. So in all these cases, a freeze frame of all sensor readings at the time is recorded in the central computer of the car. So basically, it takes a snapshot of all the readings and saves those. So when you connect your scan tool up, you can look for that freeze frame and examine that data. You or your mechanic can examine that data. Intermittent failures cause the light to light momentarily, and they often go out before the problem is located, so you probably don't need to worry about it. The freeze frame of the car's condition captured in the computer at the time of the malfunction can be very valuable in diagnosing intermittent problems. In some cases, if the car completes 3 driving cycles, when the cycle starts and stops when you turn the engine on and off, without a reoccurrence of the problem, the freeze frame will be erased and you won't be able to get that data. Because of their investment in the equipment required, most repair shops charge a fee, sometimes substantial, to attach a scan tool to diagnose the problem that your car is having. Home mechanics and small shop technicians had been restricted because of that from working with these signals by the cost and technical complexity of the equipment. But that's all changed because you can get a scan tool now that's works pretty well for around 30, 40 bucks. So scanners vary greatly in complexity. Some scanners can just read and display your trouble codes, and others can provide you with more diagnostic help. So now we're going to take a look at this YouTube video here.
Oh, Bill, just another.
Yeah.
Can you attach these to a running car and get feedback on what's either happening or going wrong?
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to looking at the code and stored information. It is, and I would assume the more advanced ones tell you, or more expensive tell you more and more.
Yeah, you can do it two ways. You can either just use your scan tool and just put your ignition to the first position so the engine doesn't start, but it's powered, and you can read some data that's stored in the computer system, or you can start the engine and get live data. Yeah, you can do that.
Question?
Yeah.
Does this, if it wasn't the check engine light, it was like the tire air alarm status icon, does it also give that information even though it didn't have check engine light?
So your tires are low and your tire monitoring system has displaying in your dashboard? That's what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. That's a good question. I don't know. I haven't tried that on my car, but I could do that and see what happens. But that's a good question. I don't know.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you scan these codes with these third-party scanners, do they clear the trouble codes? That used to be a problem.
No. So that's a good question. So they just display the code, and later on we'll examine a code and how you can break down the code so that you know what's going wrong. So you can display the code, and in some cases with some scanners you can clear that code, but you have to do that. You have to do that on purpose. You can't do that accidentally.
Okay, so by default, it will save it so that you or a mechanic can later go back over the codes and fix something.
Yeah, if you get a check engine light and you hook up your scanner and you see the code and you say, okay, this is only going to be, like $50, only going to cost around $50 to fix this, you can take it to your mechanic and he'll still see that code. He'll still see the problem.
Bill, I'm pretty sure the air pressure does not show up on this device simply because that system doesn't have to work to pass inspection, and you can't pass inspection with a check engine light. So, ergo, I don't.
Well, the OBD2 system displays lots of things that you don't need to pass inspection.
Oh,
I think it kind of depends on your tire monitoring systems. Some of them they're not all created equal, so I'm not sure if all of them would be displayed.
These monitoring systems, do they have to connect it, or are there now wireless systems?
Yeah, good question. And there's connected through a wire, and there's also connected wireless. Yeah, and we're gonna see a little bit of that in a bit.
So a quick observation about tire monitoring systems. A lot of times they're actually checking how many times it rotates, and if there's a differential across the wheels on your car, that's when it comes on.
Right.
So it indirectly catches the low pressure.
Right.
Hey, Mitch, that's part of the ABS system because it senses whether tires are rotating differently in terms of what's going on, skidding and what have you. If your front,
so there's some raw readings that come into this device. I don't know specifically what they are, but they're used for multiple purposes.
Exactly. And Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but just to be clear, this is just a monitoring tool. This tool doesn't have intelligence in it to try to ferret out what's going on. It grabs information from a central repositories in the car and just brings them to a display, versus some of the onboard stuff that we're going to show later that actually does real-time performance as Bob was talking about, correct?
That is correct. It depends on the device you're using, the scan tool that you're using. Some of them will just display the data, and other you pay more for, a little more sophisticated. You can make changes to your engine performance, for example.
Question.
Yes.
Is there some hacking potential with these, or are they well secured?
So you're anticipating. Very good. I have a page on that coming up. There is a security problem, and they are open to hacking. But that's the summary. But I have a little bit more coming up.
I want to know if the guy went back and checked his gas cap.
I'm sorry?
I want to know if that guy went back and checked if his gas cap was loose.
Yeah, it doesn't show that.
It's like watching the story without seeing the ending.
Yeah, I know that there's no resolution in that video.
No, he's a mechanic. He sold him a new gas cap.
Sold him a new car. Though not part of the EPA's OBD2 standard, the diagnostic readouts used by dealership technicians are also read through the OBD2 connector. So the service codes show such things as NOx sensor operation, ignition voltage, individual cylinder misfires, and ABS system condition. These are what you can see more. These are what the proprietary readings that you can get through your dealer, through your manufacturer. Scanners vary widely in the number of these signals that they can read. Some just show the basic OBD or OBD2 signals. Others show the full range of service codes. So OBD2 and performance tuning. So some people use the OBD2 to program extra performance from their car. Previous to the OBD2 system, you would have to replace chips in your car to do this, but now with this system, you can do some coding on your own, and these power loaders can actually reprogram the performance parameters of the car to accommodate your desire to drive faster, for example, or there are some options in your car that maybe you didn't want to pay for at the dealership, but actually, if you use the OBD2 system with the correct reader, with this correct scan tool, you can go in and turn these options on yourself. For instance, you may be able to turn on an option in the system that allows you to use your remote fob to roll down all the windows, or power down all your windows and open up your moonroof all at the same time, even though you didn't pay for that option at the dealer. So I'm just hinting at that. I'm not going to go into any details about that. Maybe later on, if people are interested in more information about modification and tuning, we can do something along those lines.
Yeah, this is George. I think it would be a good idea to have a full session, because most of us now have cars that have the system, and it'd be nice to know exactly what you can do and what you shouldn't do.
Yeah, those are two good points, what you could do and what you shouldn't do. The shouldn't do is important because if you do certain things with this, it might void your warranty. So you may not want to do that while your car is still under warranty. My car has a 6-year warranty, so I'm not messing around with any of that just yet. But yeah, that's a good point. Maybe in the future, yeah, we could try this out. Talk about that.
And Bill will bring his lawyer when we talk about that session.
Yeah, we have a lawyer in the audience, correct? In the group.
We do, but who's going to protect you for bad advice?
Yeah, I don't know.
When we get back to the community center, we can do it in the parking lot. Everybody can drive up. Bill,
Oh yeah.
Oh, Bill, question.
Yes.
Would connecting the device to the 16 pins be one of the things you must not do in order to keep your warranty?
No. You're free to connect up to this and read any of the data that's going on there. That's completely fine.
Okay,
Yep.
because at least that way we can check the advice of the mechanic by checking things ahead of time if we buy a unit.
That is correct. Some people do that before they go to the dealer. They'll use this tool and see if the information they get from the dealer squares with what they're seeing at their scan tool. Yep.
Thanks.
That's a good anticipation. Also, some people will bring this to them, bring this with them when they buy or are looking to buy a used car. And if the owner of the car gives them permission, they'll hook it up and make sure there's no, they're not seeing any codes that are bad that would put them off from buying the car.
If somebody has an accident, do the police take readouts of this information?
I don't know the answer to that question. That's a good one, though.
I think the black box that's under the driver's seat is a separate data source that's not part of the OBD system.
Okay. It could be. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. Is that Mitch?
Mitch was asking, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. That's a good one. Any other questions? All right, so this port connects ultimately up to the engine or the electronic control unit in your car, of which there can be more than one. There's an engine control module. This car is just a kind of a generic view of how many monitors there might be and where they might be located. This picture over on the right. So there's usually an engine control module. There's a vehicle control module. Transmission control module, obviously, well, the transmission, powertrain, electronic brake control module. So we've had that question before. And the body control module controls vehicle body features such as power windows and power seats. So some of that you can, if you're daring enough and get the right programmable code, you can change some of those things, but we're only going to hint at that now. I'm not going to go into any details about that. So this is this is actually a picture of the scan tool that I use, and when you see a code, this is what you're going to see, and this is how you break down that code. So they're always going to be in the form of 5 digits, alphanumeric. I'm sorry. 5 alphanumeric characters. The first unit identifies the type of error code. So in this one, the first unit is a P. So that's for the powertrain. And the second digit shows whether or not the code is manufacturer unique or not, important. So 0 means this is required by the feds. The third digit shows what the system trouble code references. So this is a 4, and the 4 is the emissions control system, okay? And digits 4 and 5 show the specific failure code. So we've got a 5-5, and these are based on the systems defined in the third digit. So in this case, this all points to the evaporative emission system leak detected. That's what you see on the scan tool, the one that I use. I got this as a gift. I think it's like $30 or $40. This port is also used now when you take your car in for a inspection, the yearly inspection. They hook up their machine, their computer to your port, and they get a readout. And this is how they determine. Over here on the right, this is my actual vehicle inspection report from May. This is where they do the, this is how they do the emissions testing now. They don't, previously 5 or 10 years ago, they used to, if you remember, they put a probe in your tailpipe and that's how they would measure the emissions. But now they rely on the OBD2 system to read your emissions information that it's getting from your car, and you can see over here what it's looking for, and the things that pass, and some things are unsupported, but this is how they get it now, through this port. So another thing you can do with this board is you can get data loggers. So they're designed to capture vehicle data while the vehicle is in normal operation for later analysis. And in some cases, you can get reductions on your insurance premiums if the data indicates that you're driving in a responsible manner. You're not going too fast. You're not starting and stopping with abandon. So you might be able to get some reduction on your insurance premium. So back to security issues, the question we had from earlier. So they have examined security around OBD2 and found that they were able to gain control over many vehicle components, this interface. So they were able to upload new firmware into the engine control units. So that could be bad for you. And there have been reports of thieves using this to reprogram devices to enable them to steal cars without the use of a key. I don't know exactly how they do that, whether they need to break into your car and connect to this port, or if they can do it wirelessly. Not sure about that. So there are some security issues that need to be fixed. And actually, that's everything in the presentation, unless there's questions, of course.
Thanks, Bill. Great job.
Bill, I have a question. What if you are a home mechanic and you work on your car? What happens to the data? Do you have to do something to change things, or, you know, in general, what goes on from if you're doing something to your own car?
Well, I think in that situation, you're not going to change the data. You're just going to examine the data and use that to repair the car, or maybe to tune the car.
What if I were to change tires, work on the braking system? But
if you were to change tires, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But I didn't do anything to the OBD or anything. I mean, I didn't look at that. I just worked on it. Yeah,
in that example of changing your tires, that's not going to affect your OBD system at all.
Anyway, I just say if I change a tire on my Honda Fit, the tire problem light comes on and stays on until I do research and find out how to turn it off. So
that's the TPS, and that's
yeah.
You can read it on the OBD because that's what the mechanics do, but it has to do with resetting the TPS system to recognize the new tire. And usually, tire places, I go to Costco, and they'll reset the TPS whenever they do tire work on the car.
Right.
Do it.
Right.
And I think that falls back into the 3 strikes and it's cleared, as that Bill talked about earlier too.
I got my car from Honda and it was blinking, and they didn't know how to reset it, so I had to go online and find out myself.
Yeah, sometimes you can reset that directly through your if you have an infotainment system in your car. There's sometimes there's a setting in there to tell the TPS monitoring system that you're good now.
Also, I don't think if you change a tire, it changes the TPS. It's when you change the stem, which they usually, because the stem contains the pressure detection hardware.
Correct.
So that if they change the stem, which they usually do, then your system won't recognize it, and you're forced to go into your infotainment system and find it and say resync.
Right.
What would you recommend for a unit that gives the most bang for the buck?
Well, the one I use is from a company called Ansell. I'm looking at it right now. It's the AD310, and it's around 30 or 40 bucks online. That's what I use. It reads a lot. It's pretty easy to use. I haven't tried to reset anything because I'm a little leery of that right now. But I have used it. So I recommend that one. I've seen other places recommend that one as well as a simple basic scan tool.
A question on security. if you connect one of those dongles to do, so you don't have to hardwire it, does that make it less secure?
I think in theory it might, if someone could, hack into your Bluetooth signal, maybe. But in reality, I don't think it really increases the security problem.
Because, having that makes it easy that you don't have to connect to the wire. You can just bring your iPhone to the car and do the testing.
Yes, you could do that, certainly, and you could leave that dongle in there permanently if you wanted as well.
Okay.
That's what most dealerships do. When you go to the dealership, they'll put a dongle, the Bluetooth dongle in the car, at least the one I used to go to. I have a Lexus, and when you go there, you pull up, and the computer has a Bluetooth reader in it, and it just shows on their computer. It just talks to the car systems through Bluetooth. And Bluetooth is, I think, 30 feet, something like that.
Yeah, it's a short range. Yeah.
Yeah, Bluetooth pairing is fairly secure, whereas some of what has been hacked was using just ordinary open Wi-Fi. These don't.
Yeah,
but if you worry about that, just pull the dongle, except when you're trying to interact with the system.
Yeah, that's great if you're not using the car's built-in feature. Some of the remote starts are open Wi-Fi.
the biggest hole that I've read about in recent years is that the cars that have the SOS systems on it and other things that report back to the manufacturer or some third party. If you Google it, you can find stories of people taking over cars that other people have been driving just to demonstrate the flaws. It's through the SOS systems, onboard systems. Chrysler comes to mind as a company that had that, but I don't know. I may be wrong, and I may be not remembering correctly.
No, you're remembering correctly. There was a story about somebody took over a Jeep and then let it go, but that Chrysler fixed the problem almost immediately, they say.
Yeah, it was not done maliciously. It was done to prove the point that there was a hole, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yes, it was.
No, Bill, this goes back to something I read about a 1.5 million years ago when OBD first came out. Fleet truck drivers were using this to monitor fleet performance when they first came out. And diesel engines are notorious for being finicky. And they were able to monitor performances of the fleet on the road and make changes to the engine parameters as people were driving, or next time they cycled the engine, and to be able to maintain fuel efficiency and what have you, as things were going on, and be notified of preventive maintenance before the vehicles got in trouble.
Yeah, that's definitely something you could do. Yeah.
Have you encountered anything that suggests that it might retain incriminating information like top speed?
So let me see if I understand your question correctly. So yeah, you can go in there. I think if you have the right experience or knowledge and look for the top speed, that is set by your engine control module. So you could go in there and you could, if you have the right tools, you could change that top speed.
Well, I wasn't thinking of changing it. I was thinking of the registry taking a look at it and deciding that you need a citation along with your reject slip.
Because you've exceeded the top speed somewhere?
Yes, yeah.
Well, what happens there is there are insurance companies that you voluntarily install a dongle and it does monitor.
Yeah.
There is some question whether that could ever be used against you.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, the insurance company can.
The top speed would have to be correlated with the location.
Yeah.
And then work back to the speed limit.
Unless you're going 155, and then you'd have to, the only place you can do that is on a track.
Car rental companies continue if you leave, it's mostly GPS where you go outside of the rental area, or if you go too fast, they can ding people as well.
Haven't they looked at it for car accidents? When there's a car accident and people make all sorts of claims, and they look at what the engine was doing and the tire rotation speed, and figure out what the person was, and the deceleration, and they figure out what the person was actually doing rather than what they say they were doing.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's through the black box.
Well,
But
isn't black
black
box
box
separate
is-
from these?
Yeah, it is.
I think, I'm not sure, and the lawyers among us can help, but I believe the black box is off limits for citation. It can be used for accident diagnosis and accident information, but I don't think you can receive a summons or a violation for something in the black box. There's a gray area there in my knowledge.
It's more if there's an accident and there's liability or injury or death.
The thing that concerns me most is top speed or running speed is contextual. If you are on 128 and everybody's going 75 and you're only going 65, you're still over the speed limit, but you're going too slowly. And that can, you have to look at the context of what's going on. You can't just look at what the speed was at a particular time to see if something really bad was going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A friend of mine from France told me that years ago, I mean, probably he told me that about 15 years ago, I would say, that at that time, the police, if they stopped you for any reason, any kind of infraction, they could go and tap into the information center and monitor your speed and give you a ticket separately about that. I don't know what happens in this country, but that was the picture then there.
Well, in Germany, they just had radars, and you got your ticket in the mail.
Oh, yes, now, more recently.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't know, this was 10 years, 20 years, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
The Germans are very efficient. We all know that.
Yeah.
The
I hate
Swiss,
to tell
the
you this,
Swiss
guys,
and the Dutch are even more.
Right now, I can tell you this from my wife's experience. There are plenty of cameras on Memorial Drive, and it turns out they monitor the license plates, and her car registration had expired, and we ticket in the mail. There was no policeman. They took a picture of the it's all automated, but a picture is taken of the plate. It's run against the registration data, and they decide if your car is registered. It's completely automated. There's no people involved, so they're watching you. Don't worry.
Automated tolling can work that way too.
Jerry, those cameras can read about 1,000 cars a minute.
Well, that's reassuring.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to drive really, really fast.
Approaching the speed of light.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the 5G IoT stuff and the edge processing is making this even more efficient.
Before I forget, I want to thank Bill. Great presentation.
Yeah. Thank you. It was fun.
Really outstanding. Thank you, Bill.
That
Thank
was
you.
great. That's great. I learned something.
It's great, but now you got us all paranoid.
I was paranoid before he ever gave a talk.
Just because you're not paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.